Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you today to present to you on behalf of the Board of the National Federation of Group Water Schemes, its future vision and the expanding role it sees for the group water scheme sector. So in her presentation earlier, Joanne has introduced you to the Rural Water Working Group that was established by the Minister back in 2018. And this slide just depicts the members of that working group. And this group is actively working towards trying to improve rural water services, looking at future investment needs and future governance arrangements. So as Joanne explained earlier this year, the group procured the services of an external consultant to help them with a research and information gathering exercise. And Tobin Consulting Engineers were appointed earlier this year. And they have been carrying out a series of works to assist the group make informed decisions. And as part of that process, there's a consultation process with a number of key stakeholders directly involved in the rural water sector, including the National Federation of Group Water Schemes and a number of individual group water schemes. So the board, in anticipation of this, the board of the Federation decided that it was timely to review our own policies and our own vision for the future. And the board organised a series of workshops with the senior management team back in May. And we reviewed a number of documentations, a number of policies, including our own strategic plan, monitoring the progress of that plan, how it was performing. We also considered the policies directly impacting the group water scheme sector, such as the Water Services Policy Statement, but also ones that indirectly impact on the sector, such as rural development policy, wider environmental policy as well. The recast drinking water directive, obviously from a legislative perspective. And also, very importantly, the motions we receive from our members on an annual basis. We also conducted a survey in 2019 where over 170 group water schemes participated and provided us with information in terms of what their investment priorities were into the future, and also what their strategic priorities would be for them as individual group water schemes. So taking all of that into account, two submissions were developed. The first one dealing largely with the investment needs issue, and a high-level document was prepared detailing the level of investment needs needed to ensure that we have a sustainable group water scheme sector into the future, and one that is fully compliant with the Drinking Water Directive. The second policy document was a high-level document focusing on the value and role the group water scheme sector plays in Irish society and how that role can be expanded into the future. So that's the document I'm going to be focusing the remainder of my presentation on with you this morning. Just to note that both these submissions were presented to Tobin Consulting Engineering as part of the consultation process, and indeed our policy submission in relation to the new direction for the group water scheme sector was submitted directly to the department for their consideration and for the consideration of the wider working group. So before I take you through the key aspects of that paper, I just wanted to focus on drinking water quality for a moment. I think we need to take stock of the significant improvements that have been made in the group water scheme sector over the last 20 odd years. And that's largely down to the significant investment provided through the multi-annual rural water programme and previous programmes, over €1 billion invested in the sector. And that has largely led to a significant improvement in drinking water quality compliance. I would also like to commend the fantastic work that's done on a daily basis by group water schemes up and down the country. Without your Trojan efforts, simply we would not be able to achieve the level of compliance that we currently have. However, there are still improvements needed. And I know this is something that Michelle will be focusing on as part of her presentation tomorrow. The recent report from the EPA focusing on private water supplies in 2019 still identifies a gap that exists between overall compliance with the regulations between public water services and group water schemes. This is simply no longer acceptable. It has to be addressed, and we're aware that there are a small number of group water schemes that are trying to address these issues under the current multi-annual rural water programme. We would urge them to make every effort possible to make decisions and to ensure that whatever investment is needed to put sustainable solutions in place for their schemes are advanced without delay. But we cannot get complacent as a sector, and every group water scheme board and management team must now focus on ensuring compliance with the Drinking Water Directive on an ongoing basis. This, regardless of any vision or future strategy, has to be priority number one for our group water scheme sector. So as I said, supports are available through the multi-annual programme to address any remaining issues, but we also need to see full implementation of the National Federation of Group Water Schemes Quality Assurance System. Most of you are very, very familiar with this system, having been around since 2003. And while it has been reviewed on a number of occasions, the system follows very closely with the water safety planning approach, which identifies risks, and group water schemes have to put risk management features in place to address these risks, to make sure your water remains continually compliant. There are a range of supports available to group water schemes to help them with this process, and our development officer team are regularly out on the ground working closely with your schemes to help improving its implementation. But I'm delighted to let you know here today that we are also working on an additional tool to try and help the group water scheme sector develop scheme-specific water safety plans into the future. As part of this process, we're working collaboratively with others, and we would look forward to, at some stage in the new year, being able to launch this tool and actively go out on the ground and help schemes assist them develop their scheme-specific water safety plan. Any plan for the future must take account of the impacts of climate change so that we can build resilience into our systems, into our supplies, but also that we can take account of the impacts of climate change in terms of raw water quality changes. We've seen over prolonged periods of drought how not just supply is affected, but also drinking water quality. We've also seen, after short, heavy bursts of rain, how some vulnerable sources are impacted. So any plan must be robust enough to deal with these issues as well. Professional management is the key, and I'm absolutely delighted with the level of uptake across the group water scheme sector of those that have taken on professional paid management. And I understand it's a very difficult decision for many schemes to have to make, moving from a solely voluntary system, which has served their community very well over the years, to a professional management system. But it is the way forward. I'm again very conscious of smaller group water schemes where this currently might not be a viable option for them. But I'm again extremely excited by the level of interest and engagement in relation to the ongoing discussions for potential future rationalisation and amalgamation projects, and I hope these can be advanced under the next programme. So going back to the board submission. So as part of this process, the board was considering the role the group water scheme plays in wider society, in rural society. And I suppose before looking forward, we just took stock of where we have come from and how the sector has evolved. And really the success of the Rural Water Programme to date is as a result of effective partnership between all of the stakeholders involved, including the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, the National Federation of Group Water Schemes and individual group water schemes and local authorities. This partnership approach has, in more recent years, been very successful in addressing the water quality issues. But we've seen the move from how group water schemes were actively engaging with their members, with their community. They were bringing people together to sell this concept and this idea of a communal piped water supply. And thankfully, as a result of the successes of those campaigns, such as the Turn on the Tap campaign, as you see there, we now know today that we have a vibrant group water scheme sector that's capable of supporting a rural economy and sustaining community-owned water schemes well into the future. The board were keen to recognise the contribution that the group water scheme sector makes to society. And this contribution goes far beyond water service provision. Group water schemes in their own right are community-owned structures. They're embedded within rural communities themselves. There's a proven track record of engagement with people from their initiation right through to the present day in terms of encouraging people to bring about change, introduce treatment systems, amalgamations, rationalizations, and more lately, source protection measures. The people involved in group water schemes are by and large leaders within the community, and they're trusted structures that are provided through cooperatives and companies limited by guarantee, very conscious of the democratic ethos of the cooperative nature. The group water schemes provide an established vehicle to bring about the necessary changes that we're currently facing. And I think this is the area that we would like to focus on, and an area that we see the group water scheme sector having a unique role to play. It's important to also notice the contribution the group water scheme sector has made to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are a series of goals that are established by the United Nations a number of years ago to help bring about and improve society on a global scale. I'm conscious that many people may not even be familiar with the SDGs and have not heard of them before. But if you, just for your benefit, we've identified 8 of them here where we directly see the group water scheme sector contributing to them, whether it be in terms of basic service provision, trying to educate our members in terms of the challenges that are out there, monitoring and ensuring that our infrastructure in terms of delivering water quality is maintained, working with people on the land in terms of protecting our valuable water resources, ensuring that the product that's supplied in terms of clean water is there for public health and compliant with all of the standards that it must. Educating our members to be responsible in terms of their overall consumption of water. And more recently, even in terms of climate action, we're very encouraged by the number of schemes that are interested to become as efficient as they possibly can to minimize their impact on the climate. One example, and there are many, but one example in particular of how group water schemes are helping to add value to rural society is through the All About Water curriculum, which many group water schemes have adopted to educate communities through their local national school. There are over 200 national schools receiving their drinking water supply from group water schemes across the country. And by adopting this curriculum, which the vast majority of those 200 schools have, the group water scheme has a direct link into the community and into the children in the classroom, where they can share their experience in terms of explaining the basics of water, where it comes from, how precious it is, how it needs to be minded and cherished. And equally in terms of explaining about how the group water scheme operates, the services it provides, and how they need the support of the local community to sustain itself into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently in a very serious crisis situation, not just nationally, but also globally. Back in 2019, an emergency was declared by the Houses of the Oireachtas in relation to biodiversity loss and climate change. The issues in particular that were highlighted were emphasised very much so in the recent publication by the EPA of their assessment of Ireland's environment from 2020. We are seeing a massive deterioration in Irish water quality in terms of the ecological status of our surface waters, but equally challenges and issues that are now starting to show in terms of groundwater sources. The impact in particular over the last 20 years is scary. We're seeing massive levels of biodiversity loss right across the country. We're seeing direct impacts now of climate change. From a group water scheme perspective, we're seeing it almost on an annual basis on a number of supplies, but also in terms of the challenges that it poses for the future, as well as deteriorating air quality and emissions. How are we going to address these issues? And I suppose sometimes the group water scheme sector might ask themselves, and I think we all need to ask ourselves, what can we do to try and help improve this situation? Because if we are to overcome this crisis, every sector, every group water scheme, every individual is going to have to make changes. And you might ask yourself, well, what has water got to do with biodiversity, or what has water got to do directly with soil or with air? And I think this is nicely explained in this graphic here from Inform Uisce, who've developed a framework for integrated land and landscape management. And it just demonstrates how interconnected our environment is. Whether it be water, ecosystems, or soil or air, impacts in one can have serious impacts in other areas of our ecosystems. Similarly, improvements that are made in one sector, such as water or ecosystems, can have a massive co-benefiting impact on other areas of our environment. The group water scheme sector has latched onto this idea, and as part of our source protection initiatives, is using the messaging tools to deal directly with communities and bring about behavioural change that's needed to protect water sources. But this is also having a very positive impact on other areas of our environment as well. So this slide really just demonstrates, I suppose, the journey that we've been on as part of that source protection pilot project. And we know from the development of our framework a number of years ago, and also the mitigation handbook we created last year with the assistance of the steering committee for these projects, that the scientific evidence is already available. But the task at hand is, how do we get to that picture on the right-hand side in Curragh Creek Group Water Scheme, where they're actively engaging with the farming community to bring about the changes that are needed to protect their drinking water source, and the benefits that come with that then in terms of wider environmental benefits such as biodiversity enhancement and carbon sequestration and preventing climate change. So this really demonstrates the unique position that the group water scheme sector are in. The vast majority of group water schemes members, they live and work in group water scheme catchments, so they don't want to do anything that's going to have a negative impact in terms of the drinking water supply. As well as that, the structures that are there, the vast majority of group water schemes operate as cooperative structures. They're well managed and governed schemes, are trusted within their community. So the messages that that entity and that body is bringing out into the wider community is generally a lot more receptive and acceptable to the community at large. And as a result of that, we're seeing communities willing to respond to the messages that they see. So we're seeing this, as I said, as part of our source protection initiatives, but also now as part of wider awareness initiatives group water scheme sectors are embarking on. So when we come to look at the value that the group water scheme sector, to put a value on the group water scheme sector, and also to assess the potential of the group water scheme sector, the board is proposing a new way of considering that. And really, the value of the sector goes far beyond economics. The contribution the group water scheme sector is making to society, the contribution it makes to improving nature, the contribution it makes at local level in terms of providing leadership for local communities to help create awareness, to help exchange knowledge and information in a very palatable way to help bring about the behavioural changes that are needed. So we were delighted earlier this summer when the department announced that they were going to support the Federation in terms of its submission it made back in 2020 to, I suppose, look at the group water scheme sector and particularly focusing on the community-owned aspect of it to try and create greater awareness about these environmental challenges. And we wanted to see, well, what could the group water scheme sector achieve in rural Ireland to make it become more aware, but also as a sector ourselves, how can we become more resilient and efficient? Specific focus areas include source protection, climate action and biodiversity enhancement. And again, it's hoped that the learnings from this process over the next 3 years will help bring about real change at community level and will further demonstrate the potential within the group water scheme sector and will hopefully lead to informing future policies, because the change is needed now. We simply cannot wait. Therefore, the sustainability of the group water scheme sector is key. And I think it's really important to note that the heavy lifting in terms of capital investment in the sector has now been done. And we now need to protect the investment that's been made over the last 20 odd years. Every effort should be made to sustain schemes that are committed to providing safe and wholesome water supplies to their members. Further investment is needed in rationalisation and amalgamation, and this is essential to ensure the long-term sustainable structures are put in place, particularly for those smaller schemes. But look at the value that those smaller schemes and those rationalised and amalgamated schemes can bring to their local communities. The sector can and is playing a vital role to help society overcome these challenges. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to quote a section from our policy document that was submitted, that the locally based and collective community approach provided by the group water scheme sector provides an obvious vehicle to promote the behavioural change that is required if we are to overcome the environmental challenges ahead. So the key message from the board and from the sector to this webinar is that we can help. We believe that we have a very important role to play, and we're hoping that the group water scheme sector can advance that role over the coming years. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking any questions you might have in the Q&A.